The Whisper of Fear. The council chamber of the Karen Dominion was carved from black stone and lit with cold white fire that floated in the air like frozen stars. At the heart of the chamber sat the High Sovereign, wrapped in silver robes that shimmered like liquid metal. Around him, the Empire's most powerful generals and ministers gathered in silence, their scaled faces tense and unreadable. The Empire had ruled for more than 10,000 years, conquering thousands of worlds, erasing hundreds of species and forcing billions into servitude. None dared question their power. Yet tonight, something was different. A whisper had spread across the chamber before the sovereign even spoke. A single word that carried weight heavier than entire fleets. Human. The first to speak was General Zorath, his voice deep and sharp as he rose from his seat. He told the chamber of reports from the border territories. Patrol ships had intercepted strange signals near the Veil Nebula. The signals were old, using frequencies thought to have died with a long-forgotten race. At first the scouts dismissed it as noise, but then fragments of language were decoded. A language every archivist feared to hear again. It was human. The ministers shifted uneasily. Some hissed, others whispered to their neighbors, a few scoffed, calling it superstition. But no one laughed. No one dared. They all knew the stories carved into the Empire's history, the dark scars left by wars of the past. Humanity, though small in number and fragile in body, had once resisted the Dominion. Not only resisted, they had brought it to the brink of collapse. The sovereign leaned forward, his eyes glowing red in the dim firelight. He asked Zorath to repeat what he had said. Zorath obeyed, his voice steady but his talons tapping nervously on the stone table. The human signal was real, and worse, it was not just a recording. It was alive. Someone, somewhere, was transmitting. Now. A silence heavier than death fell over the chamber. The sovereign's gaze swept across the room, and every minister avoided his eyes. He asked the question none wanted to hear. Could a human truly still live after so many centuries? Scholar Vera, the Empire's chief historian, raised her trembling hands. She explained what was written in the ancient archives. Humanity had not been destroyed by chance. They had been erased by design. The Dominion had spent generations hunting them across the stars, burning their worlds, scattering their fleets, until the species itself vanished into legend. It was the only genocide in Dominion history that had been carried out with such complete devotion. And still it seemed they had failed. The younger generals laughed nervously, claiming no single survivor could threaten an empire that ruled a quarter of the galaxy. But their laughter rang hollow. They knew the truth. Even one human, armed, with nothing but their stubborn will, could become a spark that lit rebellion across entire sectors. For humans were not like other species. They were predators, born on a world that devoured the weak. They were fighters who turned fear into fuel and pain into strength. And worst of all, they inspired others to rise. Whispers grew louder as memories resurfaced. Old veterans who had fought against humanity spoke of battles where fleets twice the size were torn apart by cunning human traps. They spoke of warriors who fought long after wounds should have killed them, of soldiers who laughed in the face of death, of captains who rammed their burning ships into Dominion dreadnoughts just to take the enemy with them. No other species had ever shown such madness. No other had ever made the Dominion bleed so deeply. The sovereign stood and the chamber went silent again. He declared that the rumor must be silenced before it spread further. The Empire's strength lay not only in weapons but in fear, and, if fear turned against them, cracks would form. He commanded that a fleet be dispatched at once to the Veil Nebula. They were to find this signal, trace it, and erase whoever sent it. Alive or not, no human could be allowed to exist. But as the generals bowed and the ministers nodded, none of them could shake the feeling clawing at their hearts. Fear, not fear of battle, not fear of death, fear of one human. The strongest empire in the galaxy, forged in conquest and fire, trembled at the possibility that their greatest enemy had returned. Somewhere in the darkness of space, a single survivor waited, and the Dominion could not escape the shadow of what humanity once was. The Whisper had become a storm, and the Empire had only just begun to feel it. The forgotten legend. The fleet was already preparing for departure when the Empire's scholars and strategists gathered in the archives of memory, a colossal library carved into the moon of Valith. Endless shelves rose higher than the eye could follow, each filled with tablets, crystals, and living records of wars past. It was here that Scholar Vera had been ordered by the Sovereign to uncover the truth of humanity and to brief the High Command before their ships left. She walked slowly between the glowing shelves, her scaled fingers brushing over the carved records, her heart pounding as she read the warnings written by her ancestors. The more she read, the colder her blood became. When the generals arrived, they carried themselves with arrogance. Some laughed that a single human could not possibly matter. Others muttered that the Sovereign was right to be cautious, for whispers of humans spread like a plague of fear through soldiers and civilians alike. Vera raised her voice and demanded silence, for she had uncovered more than fragments. She had uncovered the full history, the story that every Dominion ruler since the genocide had tried to bury. She told them of the First Contact War, when the Dominion first met humans on the fringe worlds. The Empire had believed them to be primitive, for their bodies were soft and their worlds fragile compared to the Dominion's brutal colonies. Yet the first fleet sent to subjugate them never returned. A second fleet was dispatched 3 times, larger, and though it returned, it was shattered, with half its ships destroyed. The commanders spoke of impossible tactics, of humans who fought as if they could see into the future, predicting every ambush, every trap, every maneuver. Vera read from the tablets the words of an admiral long dead. He had written that fighting. Humans was like fighting the storms of their homeworld, endless and merciless where the weak were broken and only the strong endured. He wrote that every human soldier seemed to carry inside them a fire that burned brighter in the face of death, and he wrote a final line that echoed through the chamber even now. If one survives, all survive, for they are never truly alone. Tro. Generals shifted uneasily, their arrogance fading. They asked how such a race could have been destroyed if they were so dangerous. Vera told them that the genocide of humanity had taken centuries, world by world, city by city. The Dominion had burned their homes, shattered their fleets, and poisoned their skies. Even then, humans never surrendered. They fought with spears when guns were taken, with stones when spears were broken, and with their bare hands when nothing else remained. For every world destroyed, the Dominion paid with fleets, with armies, with the blood of millions. The Sovereign's ancestors had finally resorted to a campaign not of conquest, but of extermination. They used weapons forbidden by every law of war, burning entire continents and erasing every trace of human life. Yet even then, survivors appeared, striking from shadows, sabotaging Dominion supply lines, freeing slaves, spreading rebellion. It was only after the destruction of Seoul itself, humanity's cradle, that the survivors scattered into myth. The Empire had believed them finished, but none had ever been captured alive. Not one body had ever been presented as proof. The generals argued, some insisting that the legends exaggerated human strength, others whispering that the absence of proof was the most terrifying detail of all. If even one had endured, the Empire might still face the same enemy it had tried so hard to erase. Vera closed the last record with shaking hands and told them that every empire in history had feared humanity for the same reason. They were not the strongest in body, not the most advanced in technology, not the most numerous, but they were the most relentless, and relentlessness could topple even the strongest empire. Outside, word of the human signal spread faster than orders could suppress it. Soldiers on the border whispered around their campfires. Civilians in the capital repeated the rumor in hushed voices, passing it like forbidden fruit. Slave races bound in chains felt something stir in their hearts that had been silent for generations. If a human still lived, perhaps hope still lived too. The Dominion tried to stamp the rumor out, but every attempt to silence it only made it stronger. The fear of humans was buried deep in the bones of the Empire, written into every story told to children, etched into every scar left by the old wars. Now those scars burned again. The empire that ruled thousands of worlds felt something it had not felt in 1,000 years. Doubt. In the halls of power, the sovereign watched his generals bicker and his ministers whisper. He said nothing, but in the shadows of his mind he too remembered the stories his tutors had told him as a hatchling. Stories of human warriors who would rather die than kneel, of captains who fought battles even after their ships were destroyed, of eyes that glowed with madness and courage in equal measure. He had once dismissed them as fables. Now he was not so sure. The whisper of fear was no longer just a rumor. It was becoming a legend reborn, and legends had the power to shake even the greatest empire. The lone survivor appears. On the edge of the Veil Nebula, a small Dominion outpost floated in the dark like a watchtower lost in endless night. The station was old and forgotten, its crew made of weary soldiers and junior officers who believed they had been posted there as punishment rather than duty. They lived their days in silence, checking long-range scanners that rarely showed anything more than drifting asteroids and broken satellites. But one night the silence was shattered. The scanners began to scream as signals not heard in centuries filled the command chamber. The officers rushed to their consoles, their eyes wide as the ancient frequencies spilled across the screens. At first they thought it was interference, but then the language code appeared. Human language. The youngest officer trembled as he repeated the words that appeared on his console. The signal was alive, current, not a relic of the past. The station commander ordered the crew to focus the arrays, and slowly an image formed on their main display. Out of the thick dust of the veil, a ship emerged. It was unlike anything the Dominion had built, a vessel scarred by centuries of war yet still alive with power. Its hull bore the marks of old battles. Blackened plates welded over shattered wounds, but it moved with the purpose of a predator. The command chamber grew silent as the shape filled their screen. Every officer knew the stories. Every one of them felt their hearts sink as they realized the impossible. A human warship. From its bridge came a voice that shook the crew to their bones. It was deep, raw, and carried the weight of endless survival. The words were simple, but they carried, meaning sharper than blades. This is Captain Marcus Hale of Earth. Humanity still lives. The name was not familiar to the Dominion, but the declaration spread fear like wildfire. The officers whispered among themselves, some begging the commander to cut communications, others frozen with dread. The commander, shaking, sent word back to the Dominion High Command. The signal was relayed across star systems in moments, and in the capital the sovereign himself heard the voice. It was not a legend, not a rumor. It was a truth that could not be erased. A human lived. Meanwhile, aboard his warship, Marcus Hale stood tall despite the years of battle written into his face. His eyes were cold, his jaw lined with scars, his uniform worn but unbroken. Around him, the ship hummed with power, an ancient vessel that had survived the genocide. For decades he had wandered the dark, avoiding Dominion patrols, gathering fragments of humanity's lost technology, and waiting for the day the Empire would forget to watch, waiting for the day he could strike. Now that day had come. The Dominion reacted with fury and fear. Fleets were mobilized. Orders were shouted through channels, and the sovereign commanded that Marcus be captured alive if possible, destroyed if not. But already the damage was done. Across the Empire, the voice of a human had spread. Slaves, in chains, whispered his name. Soldiers in barracks spoke of it in hushed tones. The oppressed began to dream of freedom, for they knew what the Dominion feared most. If one human lived, then perhaps others lived too. On the border, the first Dominion fleet moved toward the Veil, but Marcus Hale did not flee. He watched them come, his eyes unblinking, his ship ready. He had no army, no allies, only himself and the spirit of a species that refused to die. He knew the Empire would send everything to crush him, but he also knew their fear was already his greatest weapon. The outpost that first detected him remained frozen in disbelief, their scanners recording every movement of his warship as it drifted closer, silent as a shadow. Some officers prayed, others cursed, but all knew their lives had just changed. The Empire they had sworn to serve had met the ghost of its greatest enemy, and that ghost was flesh and blood. Marcus Hale sent one final message before cutting transmission. His voice echoed through the Empire, heavy with promise. For every world you burned, for every life you stole, humanity remembers, and humanity returns. The Dominion had thought him a myth. Now he was real. And with his return, the shadow of the forgotten legend grew into a storm that no wall of fire could stop. The Empire's first clash, the Dominion's first fleet arrived at the Veil Nebula with the arrogance of conquerors. 12 massive battlecruisers led the formation, supported by carriers and destroyers that blotted out the stars. Their commander, Admiral Crethus, spoke with a voice that carried the weight of centuries of Dominion victories. He reminded his officers that they were the chosen defenders of the strongest empire in the galaxy, and that no single human could stand against such power. His words were filled with pride, yet deep in his chest, the shadow of doubt lingered. The stories of humanity were carved into the very marrow of the Empire, and even he could not escape their echo. Marcus Hale watched their approach from the bridge of his scarred warship. He stood in silence, his crewless vessel operated by ancient, human systems that obeyed his every command. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with a fire that no years could quench. He knew the fleet outnumbered him, outgunned him, and carried weapons far newer than the ones he wielded. Yet he also knew something else, something the Dominion had forgotten. War was not won only by numbers or firepower. War was won by will, and his will had not broken even when his species burned. As the Dominion fleet closed in, they sent demands across the channels. They ordered him to surrender, to give up his vessel and face judgment before the sovereign. Marcus did not answer. Instead, he moved his ship into the swirling dust clouds of the nebula. The Dominion followed, confident in their strength, unaware that the battlefield they entered was no longer theirs. Inside the nebula, visibility dropped to nothing. Sensors faltered, signals scrambled, and the fleet's formations broke apart. The Dominion commanders barked orders, but confusion spread like fire in dry grass. From the mist came sudden bursts of light. A Dominion destroyer screamed as its hull split apart, torn open by mines Marcus had laid in the swirling gas. A carrier ignited from within as hidden torpedoes pierced its armor. The admiral roared for discipline, but already the fear was spreading. They were not fighting in open space. They were fighting in a human trap. Marcus moved his ship like a shadow, slipping through the dust, striking with precision, and vanishing before the enemy could respond. Every blow was calculated, every strike a message. He was one man against an empire, yet he was cutting through them as if the gods themselves guided his hands. His warship, though old and battered, moved with the cunning of its captain. It was not strength that destroyed the Dominion ships. It was strategy born of desperation, the kind of strategy humans had mastered when they had nothing left but their will to survive. The Dominion soldiers panicked as stories from the old wars flooded back into their minds. They remembered tales of human fleets that turned defeat into victory with impossible tricks. They remembered battles where entire Dominion armadas had fallen to enemies who should not have stood a chance. Now those stories lived again in the fire consuming their ships. Admiral Crethus tried to rally his fleet, but every command was answered with silence as one ship after another fell. He realized too late that Marcus was not just attacking. He was teaching them fear. He could have fled into the shadows, but instead he chose to fight, to remind the Dominion of why their ancestors had hunted his species to extinction. Marcus Hale was not just a survivor. He was the embodiment of everything the Dominion feared. After hours of chaos, only fragments of the once proud fleet limped away from the nebula. Crethus himself escaped in a shattered cruiser, his pride broken, his confidence destroyed. The Veil Nebula was silent again, but the silence was filled with the memory of fire. The news spread faster than the fleet could retreat. One human, alone, had destroyed a Dominion armada. In the capital, the sovereign's throne room filled with whispers and terror. Ministers demanded explanations, generals argued, and the sovereign's claws clenched in fury. Yet beneath his rage he felt what his empire had long buried. The humans had returned, and no matter how much power the Dominion wielded, no matter how many ships they built, fear would always be their weakest armor. Marcus Hale stood at the edge of the nebula, staring into the stars. His ship bore new scars. His body carried fresh wounds, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. He knew the Dominion would send more, larger fleets, greater weapons. He also knew he could not defeat them by force alone. But he had done something more powerful than destroy ships. He had shown the galaxy that the Dominion could bleed. And when an empire bleeds, others begin to dream of freedom, the human counterstrike. The flames of the Veil Nebula battle had not faded before whispers of rebellion began to stir across the Dominion's vast empire. Marcus Hale had done more than destroy a fleet. He had cracked the illusion of invincibility that the Dominion had spent millennia building. On the slave worlds where chains had grown heavy and hope had long died, people looked to the stars and remembered the legends of humanity. On mining colonies where whips kept workers bent in silence, voices began to rise in secret songs. The name of one man, one human, carried across forbidden channels and hidden networks. Marcus Hale. Humanity still lived. While the Dominion scrambled to rebuild its shattered fleet, Marcus did not remain in hiding. He struck again and again, each time deeper into Dominion territory. He did not fight to conquer worlds or to claim territory, but to spread the same fear that had once nearly toppled the empire. He freed captives from labor camps, armed them with weapons taken from their masters, and left them with words that burned brighter than any fire. You are not alone. The Dominion can be broken. His warship, though scarred and ancient, became more than a vessel. It became a symbol. Every raid, every strike, every whisper of his name reminded the galaxy that humanity's spirit was not dead. The Dominion commanders called him a ghost, a phantom that appeared from shadows and vanished before their weapons could touch him. To the oppressed, he was not a ghost but a beacon, proof that even one man could stand against an empire of billions. On the world of Kelith, Marcus attacked a shipyard that supplied Dominion cruisers. The defenders thought they were safe behind planetary shields and orbital cannons, but Marcus moved like a storm. He lured their ships into crossfire, turned their own defenses against them, and left the shipyard in ruins. As he withdrew, thousands of slaves broke their chains and seized the wreckage of Dominion weapons, raising their fists to the sky in open rebellion. Marcus did not stay to lead them. He knew his fight was not to rule, but to ignite. Still, as he looked back from his bridge and saw the fires of freedom spreading across Kelith, he felt the weight of his mission grow heavier. Humanity had been erased once. He would not allow it again. The Dominion grew desperate. Fleets were sent in every direction, searching for Marcus, but his knowledge of forgotten human tactics and his mastery of the shadows made him untouchable. He used old star routes hidden in dust clouds, warped signals to mask his trail, and struck from places no Dominion strategist expected. Admirals cursed his name, ministers demanded answers, and the sovereign himself began to see his empire slipping. Through his claws, Marcus had no army, yet entire sectors trembled at his approach. What made him most dangerous was not his warship, but the fire he lit in others. On the prison moons, riots erupted as captives overpowered their guards. On distant colonies, workers refused to obey their overseers. Even among the Dominion's own soldiers, whispers spread. If one human could do this, what would happen if more survived? Could the Empire stand against them? Fear grew into doubt, and doubt spread faster than any weapon. Marcus knew the cost of his war. Each strike took more from him, each battle carved deeper into his body and his ship. But he also knew what was at stake. He carried the memory of a species that had been burned to ash, the cries of billions whose voices had been silenced. He fought not for revenge alone, but for the future of all who still lived under Dominion chains. Humanity had been the first to resist, and now it was his duty to show others how to rise. One night, as his warship drifted in the dark between stars, Marcus stood alone at the viewport. His reflection stared back at him, scarred and weary, but his eyes still burned. He whispered to himself the vow that had kept him alive all these years. They tried to erase us, but we endure. They thought us gone, but we return. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the fire had not dimmed. The Dominion called him a criminal, a traitor to the galaxy's order. To the slaves and rebels, he was something greater. He was the living proof that no empire, no matter how strong, could erase the spirit of a people who refused to kneel. He was not just Marcus Hale, he was humanity itself, and humanity was fighting back. The Empire shatters. Within. The Dominion prided itself on strength, discipline, and control, yet as Marcus Hale continued his campaign, the cracks in that control widened until even the Sovereign could no longer deny them. Entire sectors that had once bowed their heads in silence now trembled with open unrest. Slave worlds rose in rebellion, star systems declared independence, and governors who once praised the Dominion now whispered of betrayal in secret chambers. The most dangerous threat was not Marcus's ship or even his cunning, but the idea that he had planted in every heart across the galaxy. The Dominion was not eternal. The Dominion could fall. The Sovereign called an emergency council in the throne hall, summoning his generals, ministers, and scholars. The chamber was filled with clashing voices, each one desperate to be heard. Some demanded that Marcus be hunted with every weapon in the arsenal. Others whispered that negotiating with him might calm the rising flames. But none could agree. And the longer they argued, the more the Sovereign saw the fear in their eyes. He remembered the words of his ancestors, warnings carved into the archives that humans must never be allowed to rise again. Yet here he stood, watching the foundation of his empire crumble because of one survivor. In the streets of the capital, the unrest grew worse. Citizens marched with anger and fear, demanding protection from the ghost who haunted their empire. Soldiers tried to silence them, but even they were not immune to the whispers. Rumors spread that Marcus was not alone, that hidden fleets of humans were waiting in the shadows, ready to strike. Every day, more officers reported desertions, and every day the Sovereign's claws dug deeper into his throne. Marcus did not rest. His warship struck deeper into Dominion territory than ever before. He sabotaged shipyards, destroyed supply lines, and freed captives wherever he went. His voice carried across intercepted channels, not as a conqueror, but as a herald of defiance. He told the slaves to rise, the soldiers to remember their honor, the citizens to see the truth. Humanity had been erased once, but the spirit of humanity now lived in every being who refused to kneel. On the world of Draveth, Marcus led a daring raid on a Dominion armory. He fought with the fury of a man who carried the weight of billions on his shoulders, and when the smoke cleared, thousands of rebels armed themselves with stolen weapons. They raised banners not of human worlds but of freedom, a symbol that carried across the stars. The Dominion tried to crush them, but for every rebellion they silenced, two more rose. The Empire had built its strength on fear, and now that fear was turned against it. The Sovereign grew paranoid. He ordered spies to watch his ministers, fearing betrayal. He ordered executions of suspected rebels within the capital, but the blood only fueled greater anger. He even considered unleashing the Doomsday Arsenal, weapons so terrible that even the Dominion had sworn never to use them. His council was divided, torn between survival and pride. Some urged peace, others war, but none could calm the storm Marcus had unleashed. Meanwhile, Marcus himself felt the weight of his mission pressing heavier each day. His body was weary, his ship groaned with age, but his spirit burned with unbroken fire. He saw the rebellion spreading, and he knew the time was coming when the Dominion would gamble everything to end him. He did not fear it. He had lived in the shadow of extinction for too long to fear death. What he feared was silence, the silence of chains, the silence of forgotten voices. That silence he swore would never return. One night, as his warship drifted through the darkness, Marcus stood at the viewport and looked upon the galaxy that had once abandoned his people. He thought of Earth, now nothing but ashes scattered among the stars, and he whispered a vow to those who had fallen. "Your sacrifice will not be in vain. I will see this empire fall." And across the galaxy, the Dominion trembled, for its citizens no longer believed in its strength. The empire had been built on conquest, but now it was crumbling from within, not because of fleets, not because of armies, but because one human had reminded the galaxy that even the strongest empire could be broken, the human unstoppable. The galaxy held its breath as Marcus Hale's warship appeared over the capital of the Dominion, a dark silhouette against the blazing skies. He had fought battles no one thought possible, outwitted generals who considered themselves immortal, and inspired entire star systems to rise against the chains of oppression. The final confrontation was inevitable. The Sovereign had gathered every fleet, every soldier, every weapon, and he believed that crushing Marcus would restore his empire. But the Sovereign did not understand the human mind, the human spirit, or the power of hope carried in a single soul. As the fleets clashed in orbit, the Dominion's forces pressed with overwhelming numbers, but Marcus moved with calculated precision, striking weak points and exploiting their arrogance. He was not alone, yet his presence was enough to turn the tide, for the galaxy had learned to believe in humanity again. Ships from liberated systems joined him, their pilots flying with fearless determination, and their cannons roared like thunder across the void. The battle was not just of weapons, but of will, and Marcus's will was unbreakable. On the surface, the citizens of the Dominion world watched the sky ignite with fire. They had lived under tyranny for centuries, and now they saw a single human defy everything they had been taught to fear. His image spread across holoscreens, and whispers turned to cheers as hope replaced despair. Families huddled together, and soldiers paused to witness the impossible. Marcus's name became a symbol, and every heart that beat in defiance grew stronger. The Sovereign watched from his throne, fury and fear twisting his features. He had commanded the universe and crushed every challenge before, yet this human moved as if the laws of space and war bent around him. The Sovereign summoned his personal guard beasts bred for destruction, weapons forged in the hearts of dying stars. Yet he sensed that the true battle was not with steel or fire. The true battle was with the soul of the galaxy, and in that battle the human was winning. Marcus descended through the atmosphere, leading a strike team of the bravest souls the galaxy had ever known. Each step he took across the capital streets inspired rebellion, and the Dominion soldiers faltered. Generals who once commanded fleets now hesitated as their people joined Marcus in overwhelming numbers. The city became a battlefield of courage, hope, and fury as humans and allies advanced, and every corner turned the tide further against the Dominion. The final confrontation came in the Sovereign's palace, a fortress of impossible strength. Marcus and his team breached the gates, fighting through halls of traps and elite guards. The Sovereign himself met Marcus in the throne room, a towering figure of wrath and pride, yet Marcus did not falter. He spoke not as a conqueror, but as a reminder of the truth the Dominion had forgotten. He told the Sovereign that tyranny could never last when the oppressed found courage, that fear was a weapon that could be turned against the wielder, and that the galaxy would never again bow to injustice. The battle was fierce, but Marcus moved with unyielding determination. He was not just a human. He was every life lost to the Dominion, every planet enslaved, every spirit broken and rebuilt stronger. With a final strike that combined cunning, strength, and the will of countless allies, Marcus defeated the Sovereign. The empire that had dominated the galaxy for millennia fell into chaos as its leader's control shattered. Citizens reclaimed their freedom, soldiers laid down their arms, and the galaxy witnessed a single truth. No empire, no matter how powerful, could stand against the resolve of humanity. Marcus stood amidst the ruins of the throne room, looking out across a galaxy reborn. He knew the battle was over, yet the work of rebuilding had only just begun. Systems once enslaved would rise, worlds would heal, and the story of humanity would be remembered across the stars. The human spirit had proven unstoppable, a force that even the mightiest empire feared, a spark that could ignite hope in the darkest corners of existence. And so the legend of Marcus Hale spread throughout the galaxy, a reminder that even when the strongest alien empire believed itself untouchable, one human could change everything and inspire countless others to rise. Humanity reigns. The galaxy was silent for a moment as the fires of battle faded and the wreckage of the Dominion's fleets drifted in the void. a testament to what one human could achieve when determination and courage became unstoppable. Marcus Hale walked through the remnants of the palace, his boots crushing shards of what had once been the symbol of fear and oppression. He looked around at the liberated citizens and soldiers who had once trembled beneath the empire and now stood tall, their eyes filled with awe and gratitude for the human who had changed everything. And in that moment, Marcus understood that victory was not measured by power or weapons, but by the hope and freedom restored to those who had been crushed beneath tyranny. Across countless world celebrations erupted as news of the Dominion's fall spread like wildfire. Systems that had lived in silence and fear, now sang with joy and rebellion, had turned into renaissance. Entire civilizations began to rebuild. Their homes, their fleets, their governments under the guidance of humans and allies who had learned the value of unity and resilience. Even the surviving leaders of the Dominion who once sought to enslave others, now bowed not out of fear, but respect. For the human who had shown them the strength of courage and compassion, the galaxy had witnessed the impossible, and realized that humanity was not a species to underestimate, that in their veins ran the fire of survival, creativity, and relentless determination that no weapon could extinguish. Marcus traveled from world to world, witnessing the rebirth of civilizations, planets that had been stripped bare, now flourished cities that had been haunted by oppression, now rang with laughter and commerce. Humans and aliens alike worked side by side, building a galaxy where cooperation was stronger than conquest, and peace was enforced not by fear, but by the knowledge that those who oppressed would always be met by the unwavering spirit of humanity. The legends of the battles Marcus had fought were told in every school, every ship, every council hall, and every heart that remembered the tyranny that had once gripped them. The stories of courage, resilience, and defiance became the new history, the history of a galaxy that refused to be broken. The sovereign was gone, the empire was shattered, but its lessons were etched into the minds of those who survived. Marcus ensured that no power would rise to repeat the horrors of the past. He trained new leaders, advised fledgling governments, and stood as a guardian, not just of planets but of hope itself. The galaxy no longer feared humans because they were not conquerors, they were protectors. Their strength was tempered with wisdom, and their victories were carried not for glory but for the freedom of all living beings. And everywhere Marcus went, the same message was clear, that one human could ignite change, that courage could move worlds, and that the smallest spark of defiance could burn away the darkest shadow of tyranny. And in the end, the stars themselves seemed to shine brighter, as if acknowledging the truth of what had happened. The galaxy had been reshaped by the will of a single human, and now it moved forward, united, stronger, and wiser. Every system knew that the story of Marcus Hale was not just about war or power. It was about the spirit of humanity, the ability to rise against impossible odds and inspire hope in every corner of the universe. And generations would look back on this era and remember the time when one human reminded them that fear could be conquered, that oppression could fall, and that hope would always endure. The end.